My name is Roxanne. I am 28 years old, but the events of that particular night forced me to mature faster than I ever anticipated. The suffocating tension began immediately after my sister returned to our family home, following a remarkably brief marriage that ended in absolute disaster. Standing in the center of our living room, with his arms crossed tightly, my dad coldly declared, "You have to leave." Then my mom gave me a deadline while looking at me with pure disdain, demanding, "Before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, do not let your sister see you." Instead of breaking down into useless tears or begging for a second chance, I absorbed their demands with a chilling calmness that made the air in the room feel incredibly heavy. They thought they were simply tossing out a burden they no longer wanted, having absolutely no idea they were setting the stage for their own catastrophic downfall. Just a few hours after that suffocating confrontation, I quietly packed a single suitcase with my most essential belongings before walking toward the front door without making a single sound in the dark. Before stepping out into the cold night, I placed an old iPad squarely on the kitchen island, containing a meticulously edited video lasting exactly 1 minute 31 seconds. When the sun came up, that short recording would completely destroy the arrogant reality they had built for themselves. They wanted me gone by dawn, but my silent departure was going to cost them everything they valued. Before we dive into the explosive aftermath of that morning, please hit that subscribe button to join our community, because your support helps me share more incredible stories, just like this one. Life inside that pristine planned community in Henderson, Nevada never actually provided the warmth or security of a real family. The favoritism permeated every single interaction within those walls, while the blatant disregard for financial stability became entirely normalized. My parents willingly drained their entire retirement savings just to fund a ridiculously lavish wedding for my sister Matilda. They booked the most expensive country club venue available without giving a second thought to their rapidly depleting bank accounts. The floral arrangements they selected for the reception alone cost significantly more than a reliable used vehicle. They simply wanted to project an image of absolute wealth to the neighborhood, despite the harsh reality that they were drowning in mounting debt. They clearly prioritized presenting a picture-perfect illusion over securing any logical or stable financial future for themselves. I watched them sign away their financial security with a mixture of disbelief and quiet resignation. During that entire chaotic period of wedding planning and post-wedding celebrations, I quietly took on multiple extra shifts at my job to keep the household afloat. I worked exhausting overtime hours just to ensure the utility bills were paid on time, so the electricity would not be shut off. I covered the property taxes along with the essential groceries while everyone else was distracted by designer dresses and premium catering menus. Nobody ever bothered to thank me or even acknowledge the massive financial burden resting solely on my shoulders. Dad simply assumed the bills magically resolved themselves each month while Mom was too busy curating photo albums to notice the stack of paid invoices on the kitchen counter. My silent financial contributions were consistently treated as an expected obligation rather than a massive personal sacrifice. I was effectively functioning as the invisible engine keeping their comfortable suburban lifestyle from collapsing completely. Whenever relatives came over for holiday dinners, my parents would endlessly brag about the glamorous life Matilda was supposedly living. They proudly showcased her expensive overseas vacations and designer handbags to absolutely anyone willing to listen. They painted her as the ultimate success story of the family, while completely ignoring the truth behind her reckless spending habits. Meanwhile, I sat quietly at the end of the dining table, functioning essentially as an invisible financial pillar, keeping the very roof over their heads intact. Whenever an aunt or uncle asked about my life, Mom would quickly change the subject back to Matilda's newest luxury purchase. They clearly viewed my steady career and responsible choices as boring details entirely unworthy of public conversation. I was simply the reliable workhorse expected to stay out of the spotlight and silently fund their grand delusions without ever demanding any recognition. However, that magnificent facade quickly crumbled into dust when the reality of everyday marriage caught up with her unsustainable lifestyle. Matilda's marriage imploded spectacularly less than a single year after that excessively expensive and highly publicized wedding ceremony. Her husband finally grew utterly exhausted by her constant demands for luxury goods and her complete refusal to contribute anything meaningful to their household. He filed for divorce and explicitly demanded she vacate his property after discovering the massive secret credit card debts she had accumulated under his name. The fairy tale they had all funded and bragged about evaporated overnight, leaving behind nothing but ruined credit scores and profound embarrassment. The perfect child suddenly found herself facing the severe consequences of her own financial incompetence without a wealthy spouse to shield her from reality. She had never learned how to manage a budget or hold down a steady job because my parents had constantly shielded her from any form of accountability. The entire situation spiraled completely out of control late one Tuesday evening when the house phone rang loudly during dinner. Mom answered the call and immediately began gasping dramatically as Matilda sobbed hysterically on the other end of the line. Through exaggerated tears, Matilda announced that her husband had locked her out of their upscale apartment. She boldly declared she was packing her designer luggage and driving straight back to Henderson to seek emotional healing under this roof. Dad immediately went into protective mode, promising she could stay as long as needed to recover from her ordeal. Neither paused for a second to consider how her return might impact the person actually paying the mortgage and keeping the lights on. They simply welcomed the chaos back into the house, preparing to sacrifice my peace of mind to accommodate her massive ego. That weekend, an urgent family meeting was organized right in the living room, with a deeply tense atmosphere surrounding us. My parents sat rigidly on the center sofa with incredibly serious expressions etched across their faces while completely ignoring my presence initially. They had clearly spent the previous hours meticulously planning how to restructure the entire household dynamics to accommodate the sudden arrival. Without any hesitation, they began outlining a series of completely unreasonable demands designed specifically to clear the path for their favorite. They wanted to ensure the absolute most comfortable environment possible for the grand return from her failed marriage. They completely ignored the undeniable fact that their demands would drastically disrupt the stable life I had carefully built while paying their mortgage. Mom looked directly into my eyes across the coffee table to issue a non-negotiable directive regarding my current living situation. Her voice carried absolutely no warmth or sympathy for my established boundaries as she delivered her meticulously rehearsed eviction plan. She stated with absolute authority, "You must clear out all your belongings and give up the master bedroom for Matilda because she is going through a completely devastating period." She genuinely expected me to simply nod in agreement and immediately start packing my clothes into boxes without a single word of protest. The sheer audacity of demanding I surrender the very room I personally paid to renovate left a profoundly bitter taste in my mouth. Before I could even process the sheer disrespect of that initial command, Dad immediately delivered the final crushing blow to eliminate any potential negotiation. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on his knees to ensure I understood the absolute finality of his impending statement. With a completely dismissive wave of his hand, he coldly declared, "And you should move your things down to the garage, because we do not have any better alternatives right now." He delivered this insulting proposition while staring at me as if assigning a dark and damp concrete floor was completely logical. The garage lacked proper insulation, making it practically uninhabitable during the brutally unpredictable Nevada temperature fluctuations. They expected me to silently accept living among dusty storage boxes just to ensure Matilda had a luxurious sanctuary upstairs. I firmly refused this incredibly unfair arrangement while maintaining direct eye contact with both of them to demonstrate my unwavering resolve. Instead of retreating, I bluntly reminded them about the massive financial responsibilities I had shouldered completely alone over the past few years. I explicitly detailed the enormous sums of money transferred directly from my bank accounts to maintain the comfortable living standards they currently enjoyed. I systematically listed the property taxes along with the essential utility payments that had kept this exact building from going into foreclosure during their reckless spending phases. It was utterly unacceptable for them to strip away my basic living conditions while actively relying on my monthly income to survive. My fierce resistance to their coordinated attack was instantly judged as an act of profound selfishness and unforgivable rebellion against their parental authority. The logical financial reality I presented completely shattered their carefully constructed illusion, causing them to completely lose their tempers in a spectacular fashion. Their faces flushed with uncontrollable anger because they were entirely unaccustomed to me setting firm boundaries or rejecting their manipulative commands. Dad stood up abruptly, knocking his knee against the wooden table to forcefully officially kick me out onto the street before the sun rose. That explosive confrontation permanently severed any remaining emotional ties while pushing me toward the ultimate retaliation strategy. They had successfully evicted their only reliable financial provider without spending a single second considering the catastrophic legal reality waiting for them tomorrow. That night, when the echoes of boisterous laughter finally died down from the lower floor, I sat in absolute silence in the center of my room to think. The lingering sounds of my parents celebrating the homecoming of Matilda felt like a sharp physical weight pressing against my chest. Bitter memories of a childhood spent being pushed to the periphery, constantly standing in the long shadow of my older sister, flooded my mind with overwhelming clarity. I realized with painful certainty that this extreme favoritism was a deep-seated and incurable disease within our family dynamic. Every accomplishment I ever achieved was met with a shrug, while even the smallest whimper from Matilda was treated like a national emergency. They had spent decades treating me like an expendable resource while pouring every ounce of their emotional and financial energy into their favorite child. I sat on the edge of my bed looking at the boxes they expected me to move into the garage and whispered a firm resolution to myself. I told my reflection in the dim light with absolute finality, I cannot continue to drown in this suffocating and exploitative environment for a single second longer. The decision to break free did not bring tears, but rather a cold and analytical clarity that instantly replaced the old feelings of resentment. I understood that my presence in this house was merely a convenience for them, and my absence would be the only thing to teach them the true cost of their arrogance. There was no longer any room for negotiation or compromise because they had already made their choice to cast me aside without a second thought. Instead of letting useless emotions cloud my judgment, I stood up and walked directly toward the heavy personal safe hidden in the back of my closet. I carefully pulled out the thick folder containing the vital legal documents that I had meticulously secured and kept secret over the past several years. These papers were the culmination of my hard work and the strategic financial moves I had made to rescue the family from their own stupidity. I looked over the official deeds and the bank statements that clearly listed my name as the sole legal owner of this entire property. My parents were so blinded by their own self-importance that they had completely forgotten who actually signed the papers when the bank threatened foreclosure. I opened the camera app on my phone and positioned it carefully to record a concise and professional video while holding the legal documents up to the lens. I meticulously explained the current legal status of the house while displaying the official red seals and my signature on the updated property deed. I made sure every word was delivered with a sharp and unwavering tone that left absolutely no room for misunderstanding or legal loopholes. The final recording lasted exactly 1 minute and 31 seconds, and it was a masterpiece of cold and calculated retaliation. This was not a message of anger, but a clinical announcement of the reality they were about to face when the sun came up tomorrow morning. After successfully copying the video file onto an old iPad, I walked down the stairs and placed the device in the most visible spot on the kitchen island. I ensured the screen was facing the chair where Dad always sat to drink his morning coffee, so he could not possibly overlook it. I quietly pulled my small suitcase toward the front door, making sure my movements were completely silent to avoid waking anyone in the house. The cool air of the Nevada night hit my face as I stepped across the threshold and gently closed the door behind me, forever. I drove away from the neighborhood long before the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, leaving behind a ticking legal time bomb. The morning after my silent departure, the sounds of satisfied footsteps echoed across the hardwood floors of the kitchen. My parents woke up in an incredibly smug mood because they were absolutely certain that I had submissively obeyed their cruel orders. They truly believed I had disappeared into the night like a defeated child to make room for their beloved favorite daughter. They likely spent their first few minutes of the day imagining how they would redecorate my former bedroom to suit Matilda's expensive tastes. Their arrogance prevented them from noticing the missing suitcase or the calculated coldness of the atmosphere I had left behind. Dad walked toward the kitchen island to prepare his morning coffee and immediately spotted the old iPad I had strategically placed there. He called Mom over with a curious tone, assuming I had left a pathetic digital apology, or perhaps a desperate plea for their forgiveness. Dad muttered to Mom with a smug grin. She probably realized she has nowhere else to go and wants to beg for her old room back. They probably expected a video filled with tears and promises to do better, just so I could return to my damp spot in the garage. They huddled together in front of the small screen, ready to enjoy what they thought would be my total humiliation. Their sense of superiority was about to be obliterated by the very technology they barely understood, but frequently relied on to maintain their lifestyle. The moment Dad pressed the play button, the video instantly shattered every single one of their comfortable illusions regarding this property. Instead of a weeping daughter, they saw a professional and composed version of me holding up the official property deeds with undeniable authority. I clearly stated that I was the sole legal owner of this house in Henderson and that their residency was now entirely at my discretion. The recording served as an official 30-day notice to vacate under Nevada law, which meant they had exactly 1 month to find a new place to live. I calmly explained that their failure to recognize my financial contributions had led to this inevitable and permanent legal separation. They watched in stunned silence as I detailed the exact steps I had taken to secure the house during their previous financial crisis. Right as the weight of my words began to sink into their minds, the front door swung open with a loud and dramatic bang. Matilda marched into the foyer, lugging several oversized designer suitcases while shouting demands about where her breakfast was being served. Matilda yelled from the hallway without even looking toward the kitchen. "Someone better help me with these bags because they are far too heavy for me to carry alone." Her loud and entitled voice completely shattered the heavy silence that had fallen over my stunned parents in the kitchen. She acted as if she were entering a luxury hotel rather than the house she had just helped destabilize through her selfish behavior. She had absolutely no idea that the sanctuary she was counting on was currently crumbling beneath her feet. Mom stood frozen by the counter with her hand trembling violently as she pointed toward the glowing screen of the iPad. Her voice was thin and filled with a terrifying realization when she finally managed to speak to her noisy eldest daughter. She whispered in a tone that was barely audible over the sound of Matilda dropping her bags on the floor. "Matilda, come here and watch this right now because Roxanne left it for us." Matilda walked over with an annoyed expression that quickly transformed into a mask of pure horror as she watched me list the legal consequences of their actions. All three of them stood completely motionless in the kitchen, while the reality of their impending homelessness finally became a terrifying certainty. Later that afternoon, as I was finally settling into my temporary accommodation, the phone in my pocket began to vibrate incessantly with a string of aggressive voicemails. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed watching the screen light up repeatedly, while my father left a message filled with absolute rage. He shouted into the recording claiming that I had committed a serious crime by forging official government property documents to steal their home. Dad yelled into my voicemail with a desperate and threatening tone. "Do you honestly think you can get away with forging government documents because I am calling the police to have you sent to prison immediately?" It was clear that he was still clinging to the false hope that his parental authority could somehow override the cold legal facts of the property deed. I chose to maintain absolute silence by refusing to respond to any of the increasingly desperate messages or answer any of the incoming calls throughout the entire day. I realized that any interaction with them would only provide more ammunition for their manipulation, so I locked my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand to regain my composure. I understood that my silence was the most powerful weapon I possessed because it left them screaming into a void without any way to exert their usual control over my emotions or my decisions. Instead of engaging in a pointless and emotionally draining argument, I carefully began to save every single one of those threatening recordings as future legal evidence for the courtroom. I knew that having a documented record of his verbal abuse and false accusations would be incredibly beneficial when we eventually stood before a judge to finalize the eviction. I maintained a clinical and detached mindset while systematically organizing the digital files into a secure folder on my laptop for my legal team to review during our next meeting. When Matilda realized that I was completely ignoring their direct attempts to contact me, she quickly pivoted her strategy toward a public smear campaign on social media. She began posting a series of highly dramatized and distorted updates that were designed to portray her as a tragic victim being cruelly evicted by a heartless sibling. Matilda filled her profiles with tearful photos while making vague accusations about how I was supposedly stealing the house to leave my elderly parents homeless on the street. Her posts attracted a wave of sympathetic comments from distant relatives and acquaintances who had absolutely no understanding of the actual financial reality behind the situation. I watched from a distance as her fabrications spread across the internet, but I refused to provide her with the satisfaction of a public rebuttal or any emotional reaction. Amidst the growing storm of online vitriol, my best friend Sarah reached out to provide the genuine emotional support that my own family had always denied me. She called me later that evening to offer her guest room and ensure that I had a safe place to stay away from the chaos of the hotel. Sarah told me with a voice full of sincere conviction and friendship, "You can stay at my place for as long as you possibly want, so please do not spend a single second worrying about those disgusting lies being posted on the internet." Her invitation provided me with an essential sanctuary where I could finally find some peace of mind and begin focusing on the difficult legal path ahead. Having a loyal friend who understood the truth of my upbringing was a powerful reminder that I did not have to face this battle entirely alone. I spent the remainder of the week ignoring the relentless smear campaign, while focusing all of my energy on working closely with a highly experienced real estate lawyer in downtown Henderson. We spent several hours each day meticulously preparing the formal filings for the civil court to ensure the eviction process proceeded without any unnecessary delays or technical errors. I provided my attorney with all of the saved voicemails along with my comprehensive financial payment history to build an airtight case before the presiding judge. My lawyer assured me that the evidence was overwhelming and that the court would likely expedite the writ of restitution, given the clear documentation of my sole legal ownership. We carefully coordinated the specific dates for the formal eviction with the local sheriff's department to ensure that the eventual removal was handled professionally, according to state laws. When the 30-day eviction period had finally expired, the front doors of the house in Henderson remained tightly shut as a clear sign of their hopeless stubbornness. My parents and Matilda still firmly refused to vacate the premises because they arrogantly believed that I would never actually use the law against my own blood. They spent those final weeks convinced that my legal threats were merely a desperate attempt to regain my former room. Their profound sense of entitlement blinded them to the reality that the Henderson authorities do not care about family drama when property deeds are involved. They had ignored every single legal notice sent to the address, thinking their status would protect them from the consequences of their actions. I officially appeared at the entrance of the driveway accompanied by 2 uniformed officers from the local sheriff's office, carrying the court-ordered writ of restitution. The presence of law enforcement with the official red seal of the court was the first real indication that their period of squatting had officially ended. I stood several feet behind the deputies, refusing to look away from the house that I had personally saved from financial ruin. The neighborhood was quiet, but I could see the curtains in the nearby houses twitching as the curious neighbors began to realize that something major was happening. The lead officer pounded heavily on the front door with a rhythmic authority that echoed throughout the entire cul-de-sac before he announced the legal directive. When Dad finally opened the door with a look of pure confusion, the officer did not hesitate to step into the threshold to prevent it from being closed. The deputy looked directly at my parents and announced in a booming voice, "You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your most essential personal items and immediately vacate this property." Dad began to stammer about the unfairness of the situation, but the officer held up a hand and stated firmly, "There is no more room for discussion because the court has already made its final decision regarding this residence." The situation quickly escalated to a state of ultimate public humiliation when a familiar black luxury vehicle belonging to Matilda's former in-laws suddenly pulled up to the curb. They had arrived at that exact moment to return the final set of divorce documents and were now forced to witness the entire pathetic scene unfold. The mother of her ex-husband rolled down the window and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "We certainly made the right choice to get our son away from this chaotic and dishonest family." Matilda emerged from the hallway clutching a designer handbag and looking completely shattered as she realized that her former family was watching her be forcibly removed from her home. Under the strict supervision of the law enforcement team and the curious eyes of every single neighbor on the street, the 3 of them were forced to drag their cheap and tattered suitcases out onto the driveway. The officer remained standing by the door until the last bag was placed in the trunk to ensure the process followed the law. My parents and Matilda looked like defeated ghosts as they hauled their belongings toward their old car while avoiding any direct eye contact with the surrounding crowd. I watched the entire process from a distance without saying a single word because the presence of the police was more than enough to communicate my final message. The sound of the car engine starting and them driving away from the community in total disgrace marked the official beginning of my new life. 6 months later, I am sitting on the expansive balcony of my new penthouse apartment while watching the vibrant city lights of Las Vegas twinkle in the distance. The entire space is filled with natural light and a profound sense of tranquility that I never thought possible during those dark years in Henderson. Many viewers might feel confused about why I chose to pack my bags and depart in the middle of the night when I was already the sole legal owner of the entire residence. I realized that engaging in a loud and emotionally draining physical confrontation with my toxic family members would only serve to satisfy their desire for drama. Leaving was a calculated tactical retreat because I wanted the professional legal system to handle the situation with clinical precision instead of a messy family brawl. I understood that having a sheriff deliver the final eviction notice would be far more impactful than any argument I could ever have with Brian or Brenda. Immediately after the successful eviction process was finalized, I worked closely with my real estate attorney to put the Henderson house on the market for a quick sale. The property sold for an incredible profit within just a weeks, which provided me with the significant capital needed to finally launch my own independent software firm. I have spent the last half year building a team of talented professionals who actually respect my vision and appreciate the hard work I put into every project. I finally have the absolute financial freedom and the quiet peace of mind that was systematically denied to me for so many years while I was living under their roof. Every single morning, I wake up feeling empowered because I no longer have to carry the heavy financial burden of supporting people who never truly cared about my well-being. My life has transformed from a cycle of silent exploitation into a journey of self-made success and genuine personal happiness. While I am currently enjoying this magnificent new chapter of absolute freedom, my parents and Matilda are struggling to survive in a cramped and rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. Brian and Brenda are facing the harsh reality of their completely depleted retirement savings, while their credit scores have been utterly destroyed by the public legal battle. They are now trapped in a miserable cycle of constant debt and bitter bickering as they finally have to face the severe consequences of their own arrogance. Matilda is no longer living the glamorous lifestyle she used to brag about because her husband's family has completely blocked her from receiving any further financial support or alimony. She is now forced to work a low-paying job just to help cover their basic rent, which is a massive blow to her once enormous and fragile ego. I have permanently blocked all of their phone numbers and social media accounts because I truly believe that some bridges are simply not worth rebuilding after they have been